A 20-year-old woman vanished after a late-night phone call with her married ex-lover. Her car was found abandoned near a boat landing. Her body has never been found. This is the case of Heather Elvis, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, where obsession, lies, and control collided in the dead of night, and a young life disappeared into silence. What really happened to Heather Elvis? And why, after all these years, has no one been able to bring her home? Heather Elvis, the eldest daughter of Terry and Debbie Elvis from South Carolina, shared a deep and unbreakable bond with her family. Raised in a household where love and loyalty were at the core, Heather stayed especially close to her father, exchanging daily text messages that reflected their unwavering connection. After graduating from St. James High School in 2011, she chose to embrace independence, moving into an apartment with her best friend, Brianna. Her parents, fully supportive, encouraged her drive to build a life on her own terms. By the age of 20, Heather was balancing work as a waitress at a themed restaurant in Myrtle Beach while pursuing a future in cosmetology, a field she was passionate about. Her younger sister once said Heather was fearless when it came to chasing dreams. Her love for beauty and the camera fueled her ambition to become a makeup artist, and her magnetic energy made her a favorite among friends and strangers alike. Known for her lively spirit and optimism, Heather had a way of lighting up every room she entered. In the summer of 2013, life seemed to be unfolding perfectly. She had settled into her apartment, was excelling in her studies, and remained surrounded by people who admired her. But fate intervened one seemingly ordinary day in June. During her shift at the restaurant, Heather's path crossed with that of a 37-year-old local handyman named Sydney, who was at the venue on a repair job. The brief encounter sparked an unexpected attraction, one Heather cryptically hinted at online with a tweet that suggested her interest in older men. What began as a passing flirtation would soon spiral into something far more consuming and dangerous. The meeting at that busy restaurant marked not just a new chapter in Heather's life, but the first step toward a future no one could have foreseen. By late July, Heather had started posting cryptic and provocative messages on social media, thinly veiled references to the man she had grown increasingly obsessed with, referring to him as the guy who builds things at my job. She made no effort to hide her infatuation from those around her. Friends and colleagues noticed how often she pointed Sydney out in the restaurant, her eyes lighting up whenever he walked through the door. Sydney, flattered by the attention, began frequenting the restaurant even on days he wasn't scheduled to work, always finding excuses to linger near the kitchen where the two would exchange laughs behind swinging doors. What may have begun as playful flirting soon escalated into something far more complicated. On one summer night, Heather posted two back-to-back tweets. "Baby did a bad thing," and "I'm in way too deep, but watch me get deeper." These declarations fueled speculation among coworkers, many of whom already suspected the 20-year-old was involved in a hidden romance with the much older married man. Gossip spread quickly, and some staff members mocked Heather openly, calling her names and questioning her judgment. One prank even involved coworkers pretending to be Sydney's wife on the phone, an act that only deepened the emotional strain Heather was facing. By August, Sydney's presence had become even more pronounced. He'd show up on his days off, often with coffee and bagels in hand, waiting near the back of the restaurant just to steal a moment with Heather. The two began to speak more freely about their bond, with Sydney telling people he might hire Heather as a nanny if his family relocated to Florida. The idea seemed strange to those who knew the affair was no longer just whispered rumors. Their frequent phone conversations and secretive meetups in remote areas only intensified suspicions. Sydney insisted he was unhappy in his marriage and claimed he planned to leave his wife, though he never followed through. For Heather, the emotional roller coaster was becoming harder to endure. She clung to promises that never materialized, while the hidden nature of their relationship and the growing judgment from others slowly wore her down. By mid-September, the spark that once made her feel alive had begun to dim, but the consequences of her entanglement were only just beginning to unfold. On the 21st of September, Heather seemed to attempt ending the affair, or perhaps the relationship unraveled on its own. That day, she tweeted a symbolic message. "Once upon a time, an angel and a devil fell in love. It did not end well. From that moment, everything turned more toxic. Sydney's wife, 34-year-old Tammy, had uncovered the affair and called Heather directly. According to Brianna, Heather's roommate who witnessed the call, Tammy mocked Heather and claimed her husband had used her for selfish reasons. Then Tammy forced Sydney to join the call. Brianna later told investigators that he yelled cruel words through the phone, reducing Heather to tears and leaving her emotionally shattered. They had stripped her of dignity, self-respect, and identity. Tammy and Sydney's relationship appeared deeply dysfunctional. Prosecutor Chris Helms described Tammy as the dominant partner, one who dictated every part of Sydney's life, from where he worked to how he behaved. Sydney, on the other hand, was portrayed as fully submissive, obeying her instructions without resistance. Helms later said Tammy had been enraged by the betrayal and was not satisfied with merely ending the affair. Instead, she wanted to crush Heather completely, to destroy her reputation, her confidence, and her peace of mind. And her vengeance was only just beginning. During this period, Tammy began using extreme methods to keep Sydney from leaving at night, reportedly handcuffing him to the bed while she slept. She also changed the password on his phone to something only she knew, and pressured him into tattooing her name across his lower abdomen. Sydney agreed to all of this, seemingly in a desperate attempt to preserve his marriage and maintain his family. According to Brianna, Tammy's aggression didn't stop with that phone call. It escalated into an ongoing campaign of harassment. Tammy began calling Heather's workplace repeatedly, hoping to get her fired. She was relentless, even using Sydney's phone to make the calls, and sending intimate photos and videos of herself with her husband to humiliate Heather further. At one point, Heather texted Sydney, pleading with him to stop his wife's behavior, saying she had lost work hours due to Tammy's constant interference. Emotionally crushed by how she had been treated by someone she once loved, and overwhelmed by Tammy's ongoing hostility, Heather tried to regain control of her life. She started attending church again with her friend Brianna, searching for peace amid the chaos. But Tammy's threats continued. In early November, she sent more alarming messages to Heather, warning her to disclose her location or face consequences. One message suggested she had been tracking Sydney since 2012 and insisted Heather speak to her directly. Another message ended with a disturbing invitation to meet the missus. Drained and terrified, Heather finally responded with a message that reflected her desperation, stating that Tammy was obsessed and that she was no longer someone worth worrying about. But for reasons she couldn't understand, Tammy still refused to let go. By late November, just over 2 weeks after receiving the last threatening messages from Tammy, life began to feel more hopeful for Heather. Sydney and Tammy had taken their 3 children on a 3-week road trip across California in their newly purchased Ford F-150 truck. With the Moas out of town, Heather finally felt like she could breathe again. The constant fear and harassment were momentarily gone. Things were also looking up professionally. She had just landed her dream job at a beauty salon as a makeup artist, scheduled to begin right before Christmas. She was thrilled, sharing her excitement with friends and family nonstop. Still, not everything was perfect. Heather was extremely worried about something that could make her situation with the Moas even worse. In early November, she and her coworkers had noticed that she had gained a noticeable amount of weight in a short time. Fearing she might be pregnant by Sydney, she was overwhelmed with anxiety. She took a pregnancy test at the restaurant with help from her manager, Jessica Cook, who later told police that Heather had been terrified of Tammy. The test came back as an error, leaving Heather without answers and still uncertain whether she was expecting or not. Heather's best friend later confirmed that she had taken a pregnancy test while at work, and at that time, she wasn't involved with anyone else besides Sydney. Despite her fears and emotional burden, Heather remained hopeful. By the winter of 2013, she felt it was finally time to move forward and rebuild her life. She was ready for a new chapter, one free from secrets and fear. So when a man she had recently met asked her out on a first date, Heather said yes, hoping that Steve Giraldi might be the beginning of something better. On the evening of the 17th of December, Heather met up with Steve at around 1 p.m. The two spent the afternoon driving through Myrtle Beach, admiring the festive holiday lights that had lit up the town. Later, they pulled into a nearby parking lot where Steve taught Heather how to drive his manual transmission vehicle. Excited, Heather sent a message to her father and best friend Brianna, along with a smiling photo, proudly announcing that she had learned how to drive stick. Steve would later recall that the evening ended on a positive note, and the two had agreed to go on a second date. He said he dropped Heather off at her apartment in Carolina Forest at around 15 past 1 a.m. Roughly 30 minutes later, at 1:45 a.m., Brianna received a phone call from Heather. She was crying uncontrollably and told her friend that Sydney had called. Heather explained that she answered because the number was unfamiliar. Sydney had claimed he had left his wife, apologized, and said he wanted to be with her again. Brianna urged her not to fall back into old patterns, reminding her that she was finally happy and moving forward. The two ended their call shortly after. 2 days later, on the 19th of December, local authorities were dispatched to investigate a vehicle reported as abandoned. The car, a green Dodge Intrepid, had been found parked awkwardly at a remote riverside area known as Peachtree Landing, located roughly 8 miles from Myrtle Beach along the Waccamaw River. The location was isolated, accessed by a long stretch of rarely traveled road, and typically used as a small boat launch. The car was locked, but officers ran the plates and quickly identified the registered owner. It was Terry Elvis, Heather's father. Terry had been watching television at home when officers arrived at his door to inform him of the vehicle's discovery. Unable to reach Heather by phone and growing increasingly concerned, he agreed to accompany the officers to Peachtree Landing, unaware of the chilling truth that would soon unfold. When Heather's father arrived at the scene and spotted her vehicle parked strangely in the isolated area, he was surprised, but not immediately alarmed. Using a spare key, he unlocked the car so officers could search it. He later recalled thinking the car might have been stolen and abandoned due to how oddly it was positioned. It didn't truly hit him that Heather was missing until officers began looking through the interior. When they failed to find her purse, keys, or cell phone inside the Dodge Intrepid, his concern grew deeper. He tried calling her phone again, but it appeared to be powered off. He then checked with staff at the Tilted Kilt, only to learn Heather wasn't working that day and wasn't scheduled until the following shift. That's when Terry Elvis realized something was terribly wrong. Heather had never done anything like this before, and it felt completely out of character. At first, the Horry County Police Department didn't treat the vehicle or Peachtree Landing as a crime scene. There was no shattered glass, no visible struggle, and no blood. Still, they filed a missing persons report immediately, launching searches around the riverside area. Divers combed the river, while law enforcement and volunteers expanded the search radius. Across several counties, friends, family, and community members braved the cold, using boats, ATVs, and even horses to search for Heather. Despite their efforts, no answers came. Heather, just 20 years old, had disappeared in the early morning hours after what had seemed like a happy date. There was no explanation as to why she left her apartment again that night. Her last known activity was learning to drive a stick shift with Steve in a parking lot, followed by a phone call to a friend to share how well it had gone. Her father cherished the last photo she sent, an image of her proudly behind the wheel. He had tried teaching her for years, but never had the patience, and now she had learned on her own. The next day, when she failed to show up for her shift, fear took hold. Her car was found abandoned not far from her family home. And as hope began to fade, her father could only urge others to hold their loved ones closer, because sometimes, waiting for the truth is the hardest part. The Christmas tree remained standing, and Heather's presence sat untouched, waiting for her return. At one point, human remains were discovered near Peachtree Landing, but analysis confirmed they belonged to a male. With no physical evidence to rely on, investigators focused on retracing Heather's movements from the 17th of December to 18th. Steve, the man Heather had gone on a date with, was brought in for questioning. He was cooperative and quickly cleared of any suspicion before being released. Meanwhile, one of the communities still hurting the most was the place where Heather worked. Her coworkers continued to feel the absence deeply. One colleague noted that Heather had worked there for over a year and that her name was still kept on the work schedule, as a symbol of hope and remembrance until peace could be found for everyone involved. To the dismay of Heather's loved ones, who were issuing public pleas and offering rewards in the early days of her disappearance, Tammy Moore launched a new wave of online hostility. She posted a lengthy rant on Facebook, beginning with an admission that Sydney had cheated on her with a psycho during September and October, the same woman who had gone missing on the 20th of December. After receiving multiple tips about Sydney's affair with Heather, including statements from Heather's roommate Brianna and several employees at the Tilted Kilt, investigators brought Sydney in for questioning. From the beginning, he was evasive and resistant. He denied being near Peachtree Landing on the night Heather vanished and claimed he had no contact with her at all. In an unusual twist, he said he and Tammy had been together that night, driving around, engaging in intimate acts in public, which they had allegedly recorded on their phones. Seasoned detectives were immediately suspicious. None of it sounded truthful. Investigators just needed the evidence to tie it all together. When they began reviewing Heather's phone records and call history, they finally uncovered the first major lead in the case. The records revealed her final movements and how Sydney was connected to them. Just as Brianna had described, Heather received a call early on the morning of the 18th from an unfamiliar number. It turned out the call had come from a public payphone. The call lasted about 5 minutes, and shortly after, Heather began calling the number back multiple times, 9 times in total. Starting at 1:35 a.m., one investigator later said the only reason someone would repeatedly call a payphone number they didn't know was if they were desperately trying to reach the person who had just contacted them. Using the records, police traced the call to a phone booth located outside a gas station in Myrtle Beach. Surveillance footage showed someone using the phone at the exact time Heather received the call. When asked about it, Sydney initially denied placing the call. Under pressure, he eventually admitted to making it, stating he had only asked Heather to stop contacting him. Tammy was also brought in for questioning. During the interview, she discussed her marriage and denied any involvement in Heather's disappearance. She downplayed the affair and claimed she didn't care about her husband's infidelities. Then, shifting the focus, she began criticizing Heather's personality and lifestyle. She described Heather as unstable and different from how she had been at that age, insisting she had opportunities to act recklessly when she was younger but chose not to. Her words, though dismissive, left investigators unsettled. Something about Tammy's tone didn't sit right. Acting on their suspicions, detectives began reviewing local surveillance footage and quickly uncovered more damning evidence. Just before making the phone call to Heather, Sydney was caught on camera at a nearby Walmart purchasing a pregnancy test. When questioned, he claimed it was for his wife, not for Heather. But even more incriminating was surveillance footage captured along the isolated road leading to Peachtree Landing. A dark Ford F-150 truck, identical to Sydney's, was seen heading toward the landing at 3:36 a.m. and then leaving the area at 3:36 a.m. Experts later testified that the truck was a 100% match to Sydney's vehicle. Sydney was the last person known to have spoken with Heather, and possibly the last to see her alive. Investigators used Heather's phone records to create a timeline of her final known movements. At 2:30 a.m., her phone again dialed the same payphone Sydney had used, but no one answered. The device then traveled toward Longbeard's Bar and Grill in Carolina Forest, not far from her apartment, and remained there for about 15 minutes before moving to a location called Augusta Plantation Drive. Heather's phone returned to Longbeard's for another 15 minutes, during which a call was made to Sydney's phone, but it went unanswered. The phone then returned to her apartment and stayed for about 5 minutes. At 3:25 a.m., another call was placed to Sydney's phone. This time, it connected and lasted 4 minutes. By 3:37 a.m., her phone had traveled to Peachtree Landing. A minute later, 3 consecutive calls were made to Sydney's number, all of which went unanswered. At 3:41 a.m., she tried one final time. There was still no response. At 3:42 a.m., Heather's phone was apparently powered off. The timing of that final signal aligned precisely with surveillance footage showing Sydney's truck heading toward Peachtree Landing. But investigators were about to uncover even more incriminating evidence. After obtaining a search warrant for the Moorer residence, authorities discovered the couple had mysteriously replaced their home surveillance system on the 21st of December, just one day after discarding the old system on the 20th. Although investigators were unable to retrieve the deleted footage from the original system, They secured video from the new one. That footage captured both Sydney and Tammy meticulously cleaning the passenger side of their truck and later burning the rags used during the process. All of this took place on the same day they installed the new security system. Meanwhile, the community continued to rally around Heather's family. A candlelight vigil was held at Peachtree Landing, the site where her car had been abandoned. Heather's loved ones continued, urging anyone with even the smallest bit of information to come forward. The Elvis family announced plans for a fundraiser to help rebuild a community garden near the landing. On Heather's birthday, the 30th of June, decorative rocks sold during the fundraiser would be placed in the garden in her memory. Proceeds would be donated to the Q Center for Missing Persons. Then, after weeks of mounting pressure, a major breakthrough came. In February 2014, authorities announced arrests in connection with Heather's disappearance. As many had long suspected, both Sydney and Tammy Moorer were taken into custody. They were soon charged with kidnapping and, despite the absence of a body, charged with murder as well. Investigators were desperate to find Heather, but the couple wasn't talking, not a single word. A pivotal breakthrough in the case came from Heather's father. While reviewing her phone records, he noticed multiple calls to a single number in the hours leading up to when her phone went silent. The number, he later told ABC News, belonged to 38-year-old Sydney Moorer. Authorities had already suspected a romantic connection between Heather and Sydney, and this only strengthened their belief. As the Moorers remained in custody, investigators worked to solidify their case. Though confident in the evidence they had collected, prosecutors ultimately determined it wasn't strong enough to uphold a murder charge. The murder counts were dropped, though the kidnapping charges remained. Debbie, Heather's mother, admitted feeling disappointed that the most serious charge had been dismissed. But she also expressed relief at not having to endure the emotional weight of a murder trial, one that would likely describe painful, speculative details about her daughter's fate. The family hoped the legal shift might motivate others to come forward now that a murder trial was no longer looming. With the most severe charges removed, Tammy and Sydney were allowed to post bail and return home while awaiting trial for kidnapping. Despite a gag order, they took to social media to declare their innocence, claiming they were being framed. Sydney even participated in a televised interview, saying the accusations had shattered his life. He spoke of the emotional toll on his family and criticized the public's harsh judgment towards something, he said, they didn't truly understand. He insisted he wouldn't plead guilty to something he didn't do. To confess, he argued, would mean letting the real perpetrator walk free in their community, unnoticed and unpunished. And that, he claimed, was the most terrifying part of all. Sydney's public defiance of the gag order finally caught up with him. His repeated media appearances led to a 5-month jail sentence for contempt of court. Tammy, too, made public statements, claiming the entire town had turned against her because of what she called lies and false narratives. The case, once buried in local rumor, had now become a national headline. In 2017, Sydney was convicted of obstruction of justice and sentenced to 10 years in prison. But the most anticipated chapter was still to come. The kidnapping trial for both Sydney and Tammy Moorer drew intense media attention. Years had passed since Heather was last seen, and the courtroom was filled with emotion as testimony after testimony was heard. In 2019, the verdict was finally reached. Tammy was found guilty of kidnapping. Sydney was convicted of both kidnapping and conspiracy. Each received 30 years in prison, 2 separate sentences for Sydney, to be served concurrently. Heather's family finally saw justice delivered, though they remained burdened by the unanswered question that lingered. Even in court, Sydney insisted on his innocence, claiming he couldn't give the Elvis family closure. "If I had something to give them, I would," he said. But there was nothing. Heather's father recalled placing his hands on an investigator's shoulders and asking, "Now what?" Because despite the convictions, there was still no trace of Heather. And for her loved ones, that silence remains the most painful part of all. As of the creation of this episode, Heather Elvis's body has never been found. Every year on the 30th of June, Heather's birthday, her family continues their mission to keep her memory alive by taping missing persons flyers around town. They remain hopeful that someone someday will come forward with the truth. For Heather's mother, Debbie, Persistence has become a way of life. She refuses to give up not only for her daughter but for the many others who are still missing. Debbie knows the pain of not knowing all too well. She channels that grief into advocacy, determined that no other family should feel alone in the search for a missing loved one. She describes the agony simply: as a mother, you ache to hold the child you once carried, to protect them, to help them in any way, but in this case, you can do nothing. What people call closure, she admits, is something she still longs for, though she hates the word. Heather's father, Terry, still holds out hope. He imagines turning around one day and seeing Heather walk through the front door. Deep down, he knows it's unlikely, but in his heart, he refuses to stop hoping. And until Heather is found, that door remains open. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share Heather's name. Share her story. Someone out there still knows something, and even the smallest detail could be the key to answers. Subscribe for more real cases that deserve to be heard, and leave a comment below. What do you think really happened to Heather Elvis?